Donald Trump is back in the White House, which means that the next 4 years are going to be very unpredictable. Is he going to buy Greenland, annex Canada, invade Mexico, turn Panama into a colony, bomb Tehran? Who can say? There is one thing though that is going to be certain, and that is that America's relationship with China is going to continue to shape American foreign policy goals into the foreseeable future. So today I'm going to give you a guide to the men and women who will be shaping America's China policy in the second Trump administration. First up, we have Marco Rubio, who will be replacing Antony Blinken in the State Department. His appointment to the State Department is a big loss to anyone who is a fan of peace, for the Floridian senator has never seen a regime change operation he has not loved. His primary foreign policy obsession while in the Senate has been Latin America, so much so that during the first Trump presidency he developed the moniker the Secretary of State for Latin American Affairs. Particularly, he has loved promoting coups in Venezuela and has been a big champion of tough and completely illegal sanctions on Cuba. However, he has over the years developed a little bit of a side hustle in China. First, coming on the scene as a big promoter of the Hong Kong protest movement, inviting key leaders of those protest movements to Capitol Hill to shake hands, and parroting their talking points on the Senate floor and in the American media. Now, of course, Marco Rubio's support for protesters does not extend to Black Lives Matter protests or Palestinian protests within America, but then Marco Rubio is hardly the first US politician to be a massive hypocrite. Recently though, his obsession has switched to the island of Taiwan. Most recently, in the Senate, he has introduced a bill called the Taiwan Peace Through Strength Act, which, if enacted, would upend decades of US policy toward Taiwan and China, and see Taiwan become the US's unsinkable battleship off the coast of the mainland. This bill has been stuck in the committee stage for some time, and now that Marco Rubio has ascended to state, it will probably never really be passed. However, it does give us a bit of an insight into the kind of Secretary of State that Marco Rubio is going to be, which is to say, super imperialistic and super confrontational. Second on our list is a man that you have probably never heard of. That is, unless that you get your rocks off to reading about international trade news. And that is the man who is most likely to be the new US trade representative, Jameson Greer. So on the campaign trail, Trump has made it clear that one of his top priorities of his new administration is going to be renegotiating the US trade relationship with various countries around the world. As China is one of the most important trading partners for the US, that means that the trading brief is going to be super important when it comes to China policy, at least in the first couple of years of the Trump presidency. Jameson Greer, therefore, is going to be a key policy architect with the US-China relationship. Greer has form in this role. He previously served as the Chief of Staff of Trump's first US trade representative, and in this role he was one of the key architects of the US-China trade war that broke out in the last couple of years of Trump's first term. In the intervening years, it does not seem as if Greer has mellowed all that much. He is still spouting off the same anti-China talking points as he was as Chief of Staff, and all of the likely China hawks have come out in support of his nomination, meaning that he is basically a shoo-in. However, there are a couple of caveats when it comes to this particular role. The first is that while Trump on the campaign trail bandied about numbers like a 60% tariff on China, I think it is important that while we take Trump seriously, we shouldn't take him literally. While on the face of it, Trump's policy seems like a big change from the Biden administration, I think it's more likely that we're going to see a continuation on Biden's tough on China trade policy, which was in itself a continuation of the Trump administration's tough on China trade policy. So what we're going to see most likely is that Jameson Greer is going to tinker about with various different policies, maybe making changes to tariffs here or there, but more or less we are going to see the same kind of policies come out that as we have been seeing for the last 6, 7, 8 years. So no big change here, but we are definitely going to have a China hawk in the US trade representative role. So it's going to be no big change, just more of the same when it comes to confrontation on the trade front from the US trade representative. Next up we have one of the biggest anti-China hawks on the list, and that is the new National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. Waltz has deep connections to the neoconservative foreign policy Republican establishment, having served as an advisor to both Donald Rumsfeld and Robert Gates at the Defense Department. He's also served in American Special Forces, taking tours of duty in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the Middle East. In Congress, Mike Waltz was a big proponent of an anti-China foreign policy, proposing, for example, a boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. In his new role as National Security Advisor, he's going to have direct access to the President, and we can expect him whispering neoconservative talking points in the ear of Donald Trump. He's probably going to be working with Marco Rubio to try and steer American foreign policy toward an aggressive, hawkish line towards China and other US adversaries. However, someone we should probably be watching even more closely is Mike Waltz's deputy, and that is Alex Wong. Alex Wong is the youngest person I'm going to be talking about today, born in only 1980. But he already has a lot of experience of the American empire. Out of college, one of his first jobs was on the Iraq Rule of Law Advisory Board for the US State Department. And from that job, he went on to serve as foreign policy advisor to the Romney-Ryan 2012 presidential run. From there, after the failure of that presidential run, he went on to serve in Senator Tom Cotton's office as a foreign policy advisor. But his big break came during the first Trump administration, where he was promoted to the Deputy Assistant Secretary for North Korean Affairs. In this role, he was part of the team who helped organise Donald Trump's tête-à-tête with Kim Jong-un. Since leaving government, he has been parked at the very hawkish foreign policy think tank, the Hudson Institute. But he's also cropped up as a visiting expert, advisor, or visiting research fellow on a variety of different anti-China think tanks, policy institutes, and pressure groups. Given Alex Wong's East Asian policy experience, and given that the actual National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, will have a lot on his plate, we should expect a lot of Mike Waltz's East Asian and Chinese memos and policy points to have probably been ghostwritten by Alex Wong. So here we have a rising apparatchik of the deep state that you should keep on your radar. Next, I want to talk about the two ambassadors who are probably going to have the most impact on China policy. First up, we have Elsie Stefanik, who will be the new US ambassador to the United Nations. Stefanik is a little bit of an odd choice for this role, given that she seems to absolutely loathe the institution she is about to join. You see, Stefanik in Congress and elsewhere has been a massive backer of Israel. She is a colossal Zionist, and in Congress has been helping run interference for Israeli operations in Gaza and elsewhere. As part of this, she has been vocal in her belief that the United Nations is institutionally anti-Semitic. Stefanik then, in the role of UN ambassador, is probably going to carry on with US policy at the UN, which is using their veto on the UN Security Council to prevent any kind of accountability for Israel inside international institutions. However, on the National Security Council, she is going to have to develop a relationship with China, who is also a permanent member of the Security Council. In Congress, Stefanik was a member of the Republican China Task Force, from where she repeatedly attacked China and helped support the task force's anti-China legislation going through Congress. As such, we can expect her relationship with China's UN ambassador to be confrontational. Finally, we have Trump's pick for US ambassador to China, former Senator David Perdue. So David Perdue actually has a little bit of experience when it comes to China. Before entering politics, he was a high-ranking CEO and business executive who had business dealings on the Chinese mainland. As a younger man, he also seems to have lived in Singapore and Hong Kong for separate periods of time. And while in the Senate, he sat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In other words, there are considerably worse people Trump could have picked for this role. However, as US-China ambassador, he's probably not going to have all that much of an impact on China-US relations. At this point in history, ambassadors to specific countries are basically glorified salespeople for American businesses. Yet, on this list, David Perdue is probably going to be on the less hawkish, more dovish side of the spectrum. So it can be hoped that David Perdue is going to have some positive outlook when it comes to US-China relations. Well, that is us done with Trump's pick for the administration on the team that is going to impact US relations with China. But to finish us off here, we have a little bit of a wild card, and that is the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. Musk invested big in the Trump campaign in 2024, having given the Trump campaign something in the region of $200 million, and also appeared as a big surrogate for the campaign, showing up at rallies, on podcasts, and tweeting like crazy. That has given him the nickname the Buddy-in-Chief, because during the transition period, he and Donald Trump have had photos with each other in various different locations, hanging out and just kind of having fun. This is going to be pretty interesting because Elon Musk has extensive business dealings inside China. For example, one of the largest Tesla factories in the world is in Shanghai. This factory accounts for about 40% of Tesla's manufacturing capacity, and it is thought to have generated somewhere in the region of $54 billion for the company over the last 3 years. China is also one of the biggest markets for Tesla's EV cars. All this means that Musk actually has quite extensive connections, at least for a US business person, with Chinese politicians, having connections with the Chinese Prime Minister, Li Qiang, going all the way back to when Li was the party secretary for Shanghai. And Musk met the Chinese President Xi Jinping during Xi's visit to San Francisco in 2023. All of this means that in a list of China hawks, Elon Musk is something of a dove. He has financial interests in China and financial reasons to see the US-China relationship either remain at the status quo or get better. Which means that Musk could be a valuable bridge between the US government, American business community and China. Certainly, Musk appears to be willing to take on this role. However, Musk is quite controversial within MAGA world itself, as the recent spat over immigration and visas proves. So how long his staying power will be within Trump's orbit remains to be seen. It also has to be said that in recent years, Musk has become a little bit more political, but he has become a little bit obsessed with Europe and the US. Perhaps his political engagement in these two regions will mean that he'll have limited impact on US-China policy. But, and as sad as it seems, our biggest hope it seems for a smooth relationship between China and the US in the second Trump presidency rests with Elon Musk, which might be the saddest thing I've ever said. So where does this leave us? Well, if these appointments are anything to go by, with the possible exception of Elon Musk, Donald Trump is going to be surrounded by a very hawkish foreign policy team, who are all pretty committed to an anti-Chinese stance. However, I don't want us to get too pessimistic here, because, let's be honest, this is hardly a decisive break with the Biden administration. Biden was a very anti-China president, and I think that anti-China rhetoric and anti-China actions is just going to be baked into American foreign policy establishment decision-making from here on in. This is something we are going to have to deal with regardless of the party in the White House, unless there is some unforeseen break with American political orthodoxy. The second point of note is that on this list, China is not the top priority for really any of the actors here. America is facing unprecedented legitimacy crisis both at home and abroad. And in the foreign policy field, there has been a renewed focus on the Middle East, thanks to Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza. A lot of the Trump world officials are also keen to resolve the Ukraine war situation. What this means is that there may yet be scope for China and Chinese policymakers to be able to find space for constructive dialogue with the new administration. Or all these unreconstructed Bush-era neoconservatives could lead us into disastrous World War III. Only time will tell.